Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore relationships, divorce, separation, and parenting apart. This episode is part of our new mini-series, where we answer your questions, discuss current news events, and share practical bite-sized tips. I'm your host, Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by financial planning expert Ben Atherton, a senior paraplanner from Octopus Money, to share his 5 money-saving tips post-divorce or separation. Now, budgeting might seem like the last thing you want to be doing when emotions are running high, but Ben says that a little bit of thought now can help a lot in the long term and in the future. So welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks for having me.
Oh, it's lovely to see you. Now, Ben, you are senior paraplanner. So first of all, what is a paraplanner?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Yeah, so I think a lot of people, when they hear the word paraplanner, can be very confused as to what it is, as you've kind of alluded to there. So effectively, what my job is to look at someone's financial situation and put together a really robust plan for them based on their kind of goals, objectives, and what they want to achieve with their lives. So I basically put all that together based on kind of various different scenarios and things that they want us to factor into their financial plan. It's then up to the financial advisor to then go and present this to the individuals in question.
Right. And I guess divorce and separation, that is a prime time for reevaluating what your goals and objectives might be. Everything gets thrown up in the air. So it's a big point in time, a big moment, isn't it, where people's ideas change out of necessity more than anything else.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we're seeing more and more that these kind of key kind of financial transitions or like big life events are really those moments in which it's kind of pivotal to really check in on your finances and take a, I suppose, reevaluate. Obviously, as you mentioned, divorce is a very, very key one. And ultimately, moving forward from divorce or separation, you are likely to see a big financial shift. And therefore, it's massively important to ensure that, everything's in order and you are doing what you need to be doing.
Well, there was some research out recently by Legal and General, and they were saying that roughly 17% of all divorces are actually stalled because of people's worries about money and sort of financial anxiety. And that might be worries about, income, it could be rising living expenses, and sometimes it's the actual cost of the divorce itself. So it feels like getting some financial advice at a time like this is absolutely key because it can help allay some of those worries. And there's nothing worse, as you know, we hear from lots of our customers, there's nothing worse than being stuck in a relationship because of all of the financial reasons. So I guess it's all about the timing.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think it's kind of one of those, isn't it, where you're going through this kind of process of wanting to divorce or separate someone, but ultimately, as you mentioned, particularly at the moment with the cost of living crisis, it is kind of one of those where it's you kind of almost being forced to make that trade-off between your emotional well-being and your financial well-being, because obviously by potentially staying with someone, it's going to be massively detrimental for you emotionally, but that financially it may be better. So ultimately what we're trying to do is kind of get the best of both worlds and say, okay, well, you want to go through this kind of divorce or separation process, but this doesn't mean that your kind of financial plans in tatters, and what can we do moving forward to put those building blocks in place.
Yeah. I mean, let's cut to the chase then. If you're going through this, or you know somebody who's going through this, you've got some tips, haven't you, for how to navigate this? What's your sort of first top tip then if, you've got to a point where the relationship is over, you're terrified about the financial impact it's going to have, what do you do?
Yeah, so as you say, I've got 5. The kind of, I suppose I've done a combination of emotional and financial tips because I think it's important to address both of those. So the first of those is really to, I suppose, give yourself permission to grieve, because ultimately when you are going through a divorce or separation, it can feel a lot like a death. You've had this other person in your life for forever, however long, and as I say, as you would with a death, it's important to kind of go through that process. And I think it's important that, emotional burnout can lead to poor or suboptimal financial decisions. So before you even try and get to the point where you're tackling things financially, it's important that you're, I suppose, addressing where you are emotionally and letting yourself go through that process. I think as well, what we've seen is that if you perhaps consider therapy or some sort of guided meditation, that can really help, because, as I say, I think it's an important part of the process to get to that point where I suppose, you're able to process what's gone on emotionally, and then when you're, I suppose, in a better emotional state, you can then start to think about things from a more financial perspective.
It's interesting what you say about, being in a bad emotional place actually impairs your ability to make decisions. It feels like divorce is like the worst of all worlds, and isn't it just at the point where you've got to make some of your perhaps biggest financial decisions that you might have ever made in your life, you're least able to do it. So I think that advice about trying to put something back into the emotional tank, whether that's therapy, whether it's meditation, as you say, whether it's exercise, whatever it is that helps to sort of reinvigorate you, it's really key because there's a big job to be done by the sounds of it. And, you can't really do that job properly until you've got your own resources bolstered.
Absolutely. I think you're right in saying that you've only got a finite, I suppose, emotional capacity or mental capacity. So if you are able to, as you say, kind of put those, I suppose, plans in place around, as I say, kind of therapy or, exercise is obviously a massive one as well. If you can do that, and that's ultimately likely to help you kind of process what's happened, and then from then onwards, you can, as I say, start to put the, I suppose, the financial bits and pieces in place as and when the time comes.
So, step one is to give yourself permission to grieve and to make sure that you're as emotionally well resourced as you can be. What's your next tip?
So the next one is I suppose similar, but I think it's probably more important moving forward, and that is to have what I call a kind of a money mindset reset. And what I mean by that is, up until this point, you've been on a financial journey with another person, and often that means that you're both having your own kind of goals and objectives and wants and needs in terms of what's important to you financially. So I think it's important to go through a process of reframing that and thinking about what's important to you, because ultimately you are going to be your number one priority moving forward. So perhaps it's something like a short-term financial win, such as getting £500 saved, or clearing a small debt. And I think it's really important to do that, because then that's going to help build that momentum that you're going to need moving forward to, I suppose, look at the wider financial plan and what you're looking to achieve.
And it's like getting one thing under your belt, isn't it? When you've done that one thing, it gives you the confidence to do the next thing and the next thing. So it's just like a small bite-sized win, if you like, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, particularly when we kind of talk about debt management and the various different kind of routes you might want to tackle that, is you've often got two different methods. One's which is snowball method, one which is an avalanche. I suppose high level one focuses on tackling the higher interest debt first, and the other one focuses on tackling the higher monetary debt first. But either way, it's, as you say, about getting that kind of first win under your belt, and as I say, helps build that momentum moving forward.
And I guess for some people, what we often find is you kind of divide the jobs up in a marriage or in a relationship, and maybe it's been one person's job to do all the financial stuff, and maybe this is the first time you're seeing finances as an individual thing, or that you're having to deal with them. Maybe it wasn't your job previously because you were doing something else in the partnership. So it's really important, isn't it, to just take those baby steps and not be, I know, embarrassed. Because sometimes I think people are embarrassed, aren't they, when they haven't been used to dealing with money, that they don't really know what to do, or they've got to ask, and they might be, in their 30s or 40s or 50s or whatever. And all of a sudden you've got to start dealing with this stuff, and it's a skill you don't have. So I think some of that is just getting a little early success to build confidence. I think that's why it's so important.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think, as you say, it's unfortunately we are in this kind of situation even in 2025 where you generally do see one of the two parties in a relationship that does deal with the finances. So that's why we're very keen on financial education and financial guidance, because ultimately you need that education at kind of as your first port of call to know what the difference between, I don't know, an ISA or a general investment account is, how to budget, that sort of thing. And for some people that might seem very basic, but ultimately, if you've not had the experience of doing that, then it's pivotal that you know how to do that, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult to kind of get the next building blocks in place moving forward.
And you're right, it's still very gendered, isn't it? There's still a sort of male-female divide around it, and often women still have more to do with children and the children's side of finances and less to do with the more investment side of the finances. So it's a learning curve, I guess, for both, but in slightly different ways, which I think leads us on to your third tip.
Yes, indeed. So, I mean, obviously, this is not going to be applicable to everybody, but it makes sense as a next step, if you like, and that is looking into child maintenance. I think that's really important that you get that in order relatively early on, so you know exactly what it is that you're entitled to. So, what I would suggest is using the child maintenance service calculator to get a kind of a baseline figure as to what you might be entitled to. I also think it's really vital that you can at least try and get some sort of agreement in writing with your spouse, rather than just relying on a kind of a verbal agreement, because who knows what might happen if that isn't in place. And kind of, I suppose, to build on that, obviously it's very important to kind of keep records of those payments as and when they're made, to try and, I suppose, avoid any potential disputes or kind of misunderstandings moving forward.
Well, the government calculator gives, like you say, it's a good baseline, but there are lots of kind of extra costs that kids tend to incur, and they seem to get more expensive as they get older, she said with bitter experience. So I think it's good to take that as a guide, but that is the statutory minimum. And it's all about, as you said, trying to get an agreement with your partner about who's paying for what, making sure it's clear. We've got a lovely app at Amicable called the Amicable Co-Parenting app, where you can put all of your financial arrangements into it. You can keep all your comms and all your records there as well. So you know exactly who's paying what, and you've got a record of everything as well. So it's worth just looking out for that, because you get it for free for the first few days too. So you can test it and try before you buy. But yeah, plug over, keeping a really clear, or having a really clear understanding of who's paying for what. And I think as well, Ben, there are often different benefits that you're entitled to. So if you live on your own, you can get a discount on your council tax if you're the only adult over the age of 18 and stuff like that. So it's worth taking a quite broad brush approach to this and finding out what benefits, if any benefits, you are entitled to. You know, you might re-qualify, or it might be worth redoing the sort of child benefit thing if there's no longer two of you earning and your income falls below a certain level. So checking out where you can get some extra help is definitely important, because at this point, like you say, if you're looking at income and outgoings and all of that is changing, it's worth, being able to claim every bit of extra cash that you can in the short term.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the first three tips. What's your fourth tip?
So the fourth tip is to update your will and your beneficiaries. So a lot of people sometimes think that you're going through a divorce or separation process kind of has an immediate impact or knock-on effect on your beneficiaries, for example, on your pensions, but that's not the case. So it's really important that you're getting those updated, because ultimately, particularly if you have been in a relationship or a marriage and your spouse or partner has been named as a beneficiary, that won't change automatically. So it's really, I suppose, vital to ensure that you are contacting your various pension providers and getting that updated to reflect your new situation. And equally with the will side of things, obviously the divorce doesn't automatically, I suppose, remove your spouse. It removes them from the will in terms of being named as a spouse, but that's often not enough for protection. So getting A, your will updated, and B, your beneficiaries for your pensions is really important. We do have, as part of the kind of Octopus group, a company called Octopus Legacy. They are kind of a will writing and protection specialist. So obviously, if you do want to look into getting your will rewritten, then yeah, I would suggest heading over to their website.
And if you're an Amicable customer, you also get a discount on their services too, as well. So if you're listening as an Amicable customer and this has prompted you to get your will sorted, then go onto your dashboard and you'll find the Octopus Legacy discount code there as well. It's one of those things you definitely forget when you're in the sort of maelstrom of getting divorced and you get to the end of it. You're just so relieved to get that final piece of paper saying it's all finished, it's all done, and you sort of want to take a breath. But actually, there's work to be done, isn't there, at that point? That's when actually you've got to kick in and start thinking, right, there are some things now that I've got my final piece of paper and my divorce is finalized that I actually now need to do. And that's a really important one, to change the pension nominations and that sort of stuff, because it's very easily forgotten. We have got a checklist as well of things to remember to do after a divorce. So you can go onto the website and look for our checklist at amicable.co.uk as well, if you're interested in just thinking through or having a list of things that you need to do when you've divorced or separated. You can check off what you have and haven't done. So it sounds like planning is very important and the timing also very important, Ben. What's the final tip you've got for us today?
Yeah, so the final tip is, I suppose, once you've the way I would look at it is those kind of 4 steps I've mentioned previously are the kind of the building blocks you want to get to, and then I suppose the fifth and final step is to plan for your financial future, because I think the previous ones are, I suppose, more about the here and now and what you want to be doing currently. I think the final step is, as I say, about thinking a bit more long term. So, for example, the first thing you might want to do is think about setting up an emergency fund. Now, what we often suggest is that you probably want to have somewhere between 3 to 6 months of your expenses saved in an emergency fund. So that just gives you a bit of a buffer, if, for example, the car breaks down or the boiler needs repairing. And I think having that really does change your kind of mental relationship with money, because you're starting, I suppose, if you've got that buffer there, you're less likely to be thinking in a scarcity mindset around money, because you know you have got that there. Whereas if you haven't got that in place, then often it can be, I suppose, a bit more emotionally and psychologically stressful if as I say, if the car or boiler does break down. So I think that's really important. The other thing I would say is, you've gone through this massive financial and life change. And with that, there may be a need or an increased need for things like life insurance, critical illness cover, and income protection. Again, kind of going back to what you said, Kate, around the kind of the stereotypical nature of certain relationships. If you're in a relationship or a marriage and your spouse was a higher earner than you, and they may have got, for example, life insurance through their work, clearly you're not going to be entitled to that anymore. So looking into setting up those plans for yourself, I think is really important.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of benefits that suddenly you realize that you haven't necessarily had in your own name, but now you have to go out and find. And I think that's, like you say, it does change your relationship with money. And, having been I'm a single parent, I've lived in fear of something breaking, and you get very precious around the kids. Like, don't break anything, don't do that. No, we can't afford to do that this month. And yeah, if you've got that buffer fund, it does fundamentally change that whole relationship with money and the whole way you think and act about money. And it makes such a difference. It really does make a difference. So really interesting. And so if people want to like go through some kind of financial planning kind of interview or kind of process, where can they find out more about this, Ben?
Yeah. So as I say, I think if you head over to octopusmoney.com, on there it will give you all the information around the kind of various services which we provide, the various different, I suppose, criteria for each of those. And I think a big part of what we do at Octopus Money is the visualization of your financial future. And that's through our very powerful software in terms of the cash flow modeling that we provide. And what we found is that is massively powerful for people, because more often than not, if you just stick a spreadsheet of numbers in front of somebody, it's very difficult to digest what that actually means. When you present it to them visually through an illustration, they can immediately see and understand what that means for their financial future.
And this isn't just people who are mega rich. I think that's the other important thing to say, isn't it? This is very much an every person service where you don't have to have huge amounts of money to come and visit somebody like you. You do it for people of modest means who are going through these big life changes and who want to just plan a different financial future now that their circumstances have changed.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're trying to do at Octopus Money is empower as many people as possible with their finances. And as you say, Kate, often when you reach out to a financial professional, financial expert, they will typically have a minimum threshold that you need to meet in order to use their services. But that's something that we're really trying to tackle and get rid of. So as you say, it doesn't matter how much or how little you've got. Ultimately we are here to try and help you through your financial future and how to navigate that.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Ben. So, as Ben says, if you're interested in finding out more, go and visit the Octopus Money website. And for separating and co parenting support, you can visit the Amicable website, which is amicable.co.uk. We have lots of resources and you can book a free advice consultation as well. You can subscribe for updates by visiting the Divorce Podcast, or you can find us on your favorite listening platform. And finally, we'd love to know how we can help you more. So please share your questions on divorce, separation and co-parenting with us at hello@amicable.co.uk. Thank you very much indeed, Ben, for joining me. And thank you everyone for listening.